Augustus Spies was born on December 10th, 1885, in Landeck, Germany. He had a good life in Germany, and it did not change until his father unexpectedly passed in the year 1871. Being the sole provider for the family, August immigrated to America along with his mother and five siblings. In America, he became an apprentice for an upholsterer. He joined the trade union and soon after the Socialist Labor Party in 1877. This is when he also joined the anarchist movement. He started editing for a paper in the late 1880s. He was notorious for creating speeches that involved violence and would be called the act of violences from his friends and his peers. Augusta believed that there should be an unclassed society and to get rid of the government completely, which made him the anarchist. When he would create the labor unions and organizations, he would tell people to use violence to solve their problems and change society the way that they believed. When doing this, he asked to start an armed revolution to make people and things go his way. The protest started on May 1st, 1886, where the labor union was protesting a normal 8-hour workday. Over 300,000 workers had started the protest, and one third of that being in Chicago. The 45,000 workers quickly turned city officials and given them what they wanted. The next protest was on May 3rd, where over 3,000 workers came to protest. When Spies was in the middle of a speech, policemen came and started to open fire on the protest, killing several workers and injuring others. The biggest protest and the reason for his death was the Haymarket protest of May 4th, 1886. During the protest, they were met with heavy police presence, and someone in the crowd threw a bomb, killing at least 8 officers and injuring 67 others. August and 7 other people were sentenced to death following the murders. What is interesting about this story is that August was not even proven to be the murderer. There were several people who can account saying that they were not the ones who threw the bomb. They even alleged the alleged bomber, Rudolf Schnauzbelt, but he was later released for lack of evidence. But since August had organized the strikes, they pinned everything on him. He was their scapegoat. He had a trial. It wasn't a very fair trial, and quickly they decided his fate. He was told he would be hanged. And in November 1887, this came true. Him, along with his 7 other colleagues, were hanged in the streets of Chicago. His last words were as follow: "There will be a time when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are throttling today."
To explain the actions of August Spies is the Marxist criminological theory. This theory of crime frames the nature of both crime and how it is defined in a class-based view of society. The Marxist theory frames society as a conflict between two classes, the ruling class and the working class, the lower class. The ruling class maintains their power and their control over society by exploiting the lower class. Now, since the nature of this relationship is inherently hostile, class conflicts begin to emerge because both sides have different goals and interests. However, when the interests of the working class, the lower class, conflict with the interests of the ruling class, the actions that the working class would take in those situations would be labeled as crime and would be subjugated via physical force, that of the police, or institutional influence through school, through media and culture, kind of a way to de-incentivize individuals by making them believe that their actions are either not moral or not acceptable or dangerous to their overall health. While this explains the nature of how some ideas are defined as crime, it also explains the motivation for crimes. Because of the nature of exploitation in this society, the lower classes often don't have access to material conditions that would improve their position in life or simply satisfy their own needs. And when the desire to fulfill this need clashes with the law as set by the ruling class, in many cases it forces individuals into a life of crime. Now that we have the theory in question, we now have to apply it to August Spies in an attempt to explain his behavior. August Spies, as mentioned before, was an anarchist and was a member of the Socialist Labor Party of America, eventually becoming the leader of the radical faction. At the time, he sympathized with the plight of workers in America who often faced horrific conditions, um, terrible pay, and long shifts that left them debilitated, alienated, and overall demoralized. This led him to um, lead many strikes and protests in order to acquire rights for workers. And these strikes oftentimes would end up violent. One of the cases that likely cemented his motivation for the bombing was an event in which, during the strike, police began to fire upon the protesting workers, killing multiple of them. It was likely at this point that August Spies, although he was already inclined to violent acts, felt that any future action against the ruling class would not only be justified, but in their own interests, and perhaps even the only way of acquiring those interests. This is likely the explanation as to why a person who did not have a history of mental illness, did not appear to be that um, poorly off in society, would take such an extreme action to orchestrate a bombing to kill policemen and other figures. Now that we've gone over the Marxist chronological theory and applied it to August Spies's actions, we're now going to go over some potential policies that could have been implemented to either prevent the Haymarket affair from happening at all, or simply reducing the violence of the protesters. The main way in which this could have been achieved was simply by complying to the demands of the workers for better wages, shorter work days, specifically in the form of the 8-hour workday, an increase in the quality and overall safety of their working conditions. All of these factors that they were demanding for could have been given to them and possibly even satisfied them. However, meeting these strikes and these protests with armed policemen was the opposite of what they should have done. All this did was not only escalate the violence, but also made the workers become more radical in both their devotion to their cause and made them feel more justified in the actions that they would soon take. Simply responding to these actions and these demands by the workers with violence didn't change the conditions that led to these demands being made. The workers were still under terrible working conditions. They still did not have the pay they needed to survive. Their shifts were too long, and the safety of their jobs was not satisfactory. None of this changed by meeting their demands with gunfire. All this did is made them more indignant and more inclined to violent actions, because now it's not simply a matter of um, gaining benefits, it's a matter of both revenge for attacks against them and the feeling that they have to fight for what they want. And this violent reaction um, limits the potential for diplomacy, which could have been utilized to prevent this bombing from ever happening.